Good evening, everybody. Is there anyone doesn't have a book, could use a handout for tonight? Carol's mad it does not have the answers. I told her a couple of days ago, I don't have the answers for Zechariah. But welcome. I'm happy you're here. As this quarter goes on, it's kind of like the remnant here at the end. We seem to be shrinking, getting smaller and smaller. But I know there's a lot of things going on this week, perhaps people traveling or in other places. Let's offer a word of thanks as we get started. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the day that is swiftly drawing to its close. We're thankful for this time, this setting, that we have this opportunity. We can step aside from work and other responsibilities. We can spend some time digging into the Scriptures. We pray tonight you would help us as we seek to garner knowledge and wisdom out of this Old Testament book. Appreciate the work that so many have done in the years past on behalf of your people, serving you, serving in your kingdom. May we draw from those examples, even in difficult times, to continue doing what's right, as Zechariah did. Please be with all of the classes, all those teaching, all those as students, that they will have a thirst and want to learn more about you and spend time in the Bible as well. In Christ's name, amen. So we're going to start tonight with a picture of a natural phenomena. I'm going to ask, have you ever sat, hopefully in a safe place, and watched a lightning storm going on? Has anybody ever done that? Oh, a couple, three, okay. Maybe marveled at the power and the energy and you know what's going on there, whether it's a singular huge bolt or they're just all over the sky and seem to be hitting everywhere. What is that like? What's that experience, or what's your feeling or thoughts as you're watching that? First, maybe glad you're safe. Power, okay, absolutely. Awestruck. Is that a pun? Like a lightning strike? Awesome. Okay. I'm a little slow tonight. Yeah. All of these things, probably more. So where I want to start tonight, I've had two or three, talk to me over the last couple of weeks, and I agree. This book it's tough. Tougher for me than some of the others. That means I need to spend more time and dig deeper and do more. Lord willing, this time through is an introductory study, and if He lets me live enough years, I can come back and maybe get some more out of it. But where I want to focus in starting tonight and talking, looking at these pictures and talk about lightning is kind of take a moment and get us back set in the time frame as Zechariah is coming and delivering his series of messages. As he's encouraging those dispersed Jews, who've been scattered many places, different countries. If you're in Zechariah, I'm going to reference a couple of verses here quickly. In chapter 9, verse 12, he's encouraging them, turn you to the stronghold. Turn your attention back to Jerusalem. Come back to Zion. We got those words that'll come throughout his message and many of the prophets. So that's the encouragement. As he's doing that, they've been hauled off in captivity or sold as slaves or whatever, living in many places. And he's trying to get them, come back and turn your attention back to God. But it's in the face of oppressors on every side. He lists some. Tell me who some of those heathen nations that were oppressors of them. Do you get to sit with us tonight? Don't have more books, but that's roughly where we're going. Who are some of these heathen or surrounding nations that he addresses in the book? Philistines. He's going to name off four of the chief cities of the Philistines, representing them. Who else? Assyria, Egypt. They're not immediate neighbors, but certainly, there's close by. He's listed off several with reference to Damascus or Syria, the region of Hamath, which is evidently just kind of up to the north of that. As Joe said, some a little bit further distant south and north, Egypt and Assyria, and there were others. The point being, all these who at times have been all at war or oppressors or coming in, causing trouble inside of Israel and or Judah. So as he's encouraging them, wherever you are, whatever you've been through, you may still be living in one of these other countries as a slave or pretty harsh conditions because you're not in your homeland. So he's encouraging them, look back to Jerusalem, look back to Zion, turn back to God is certainly the point, as any of the prophets are going to do that. But in doing that, he describes how God will fight for them. And the thought of this picture comes from chapter 9, then verse 14. If they would do that, if you'll turn your attention back, turn your hearts back to me, God says, I'll be there, I will fight for you. So whatever oppressor or mighty nation or somebody as big and bad as Assyria or Babylon or Egypt or whoever, God's saying, I'm going to fight for you if you'll turn your heart back to me. So verse 14, the Lord shall be seen over them. His arrow shall go forth as lightning. He's going to blow the trumpet, and he'll go with whirlwinds of the south. The next verse, he'll do all this to defend them, to devour the enemies, to subdue those that have been causing them these troubles. So who has the real power? It's the word Adi began with when I asked the question a few moments ago. You think about the Lord God, who the depiction is, has lightning, his arrows as a lightning. He has these types of things at his disposal. Maybe that Assyrian army isn't as threatening anymore. Or Egypt, or whoever it might be, the Philistines who have been a thorn in their side for a long, long time. I just like the imagery of that. And again, trying to help us, as we're going to try to pick some messages or thoughts out of these 3 chapters tonight, to start with his audience. It wasn't everybody right there in Jerusalem. They hadn't all got to come back yet. And perhaps many of them never would make it back into this land. All right, quickly, by way of review, we've got some visitors here tonight. We're happy to have you here. We've seen that this book, he's delivering his message along about the years 520 to 518 to BC. That his name literally means the one whom the Lord remembers. We've talked about naming for different ones and how sometimes there's a tie-in or you can see the appropriateness of that. Is that appropriate for Zechariah? Is the Lord remembering his people, this remnant who have been in captivity 70 years? But he had promised at the end of the 70 years to bring them back, and that's what he's done. The Lord does remember. He does remember his promises, his covenant, the things he has said he will do. I think that's part of the underlying current of the message throughout much of this. And Zechariah is part of the first remnant that comes back from out of Babylon captivity. So they came back in the year 536. And you see then his messages are about 16 years later. And we've seen from the first 2 studies out of this book, really driven by, they've come right back with all these supplies and materials to rebuild the what? Well, a wall later, but the temple. Yeah. First thing, get the Lord's house restored and rebuilt. So they started it, and then 16-year lag, they've got the foundation and a few sawhorses sitting around, but nothing else. They've been out building their own houses and doing lots of stuff. So Zechariah, along with, who is his counterpart? It's also going to be there giving the same message. I'm sorry? Haggai? Somebody said it, I think. Yeah, Haggai. They're both sent. And so they're coming along about this time period and saying, hey, get with it. It is time to build. Don't worry about the enemies. They're telling them God's going to protect you. God says it's time to build. Your enemies and foes are saying, stop, don't do any more work, and they've gotten you to stop. So they're trying to get them back on track. And as I said, just trying to think about here that worldwide, there are many Israelites who are not, some are still back in Babylon, some are in other nations where they've been hauled off or taken or whatever. So as he's got this message, a lot of the message, you think he's walking around Jerusalem and makes references to Zion and all this time and time again. He's trying to get attention back to them, restoration, that remnant coming back. But But many of these people are still living somewhere else. So just kind of keep that in mind as we're looking, at some of the messages as part of this book. And maybe it'll help some things give a little more sense to them. Okay, outline, this is review, but again, some haven't been here. First 8 chapters, there's this series of visions, 8 visions. The rider and the horseman, by the trees, there's assurance. The temple is going to be built, the Lord's saying. That's why I want you to get started with the job again. There's 4 horns, 4 carpenters. The horns had to do with some enemy powers that had oppressed them or said, don't do it and stop the work. God's going to cast them down. Get busy, build my house. The man with the measuring line, God's ultimate purpose. You said much of this book, many of them have dual sense of prophecy. There's the immediate context, the work they needed to do right now in rebuilding the temple, rebuilding the wall, putting the city back together and kind of getting their nation back on track, if you will. But also much of it looking down the road to spiritual Jerusalem. And so with this measuring line, he comes up, measures, man, it's like a city without walls. There's going to be so many people and so much stuff. Walls couldn't hold it. It's kind of the idea of that one. Let's see. The 4th one of those was the trial of the high priest Joshua. Remember, Satan's there. I mean, if the high priest has got sin, and he can't serve, and he's going to throw a kink in the works. So God addresses that to cleanse the priesthood, bring them back to God, and starting through the priest, then the whole nation would be cleansed. And yeah, you're going to rebuild my house. You can come back and serve me and all this. The candlestick and the olive trees, God is enabling the completion of that rebuild. Again, you see how so much this message, get back to work. The flying roll or the scroll there's a curse of God on those who are dishonest. You remember that scroll that was, 20 by 30 feet or something? Point was brought out. I believe that's how much wickedness. It took a scroll, a piece of paper that big, symbolically to write down how much wickedness. And that wickedness was all going to be carried off. And number 7, the woman in the ephah. She's there in this large container, heavy leaden lid put on it, and it's identified, this is wickedness. And then it's going to be taken and carried off to the land of Shinar, far, far away, as God is cleansing his people and the land's purified. Then the 4 chariots. The earth is at peace under God's protection. I was reminded of this Sunday morning when we were talking Revelation about the winds or the spirits going forth from God. You've got very similar type message here by Zechariah about these chariots going different directions. And he makes the point, those that have gone up to the north at this time, there's a sense of peace, God says. Still review the high priest being crowned as a symbol of the Messiah. Chapter 7 and on into 8, they had some question about some mourning they were doing. The temple had been destroyed or knocked down in the 5th month of the year, way back there. So they come along saying, every year on the fifth month, on the right day, we've been having this feast of mourning and remembrance. Should we keep doing that? Because now we're back and we're going to rebuild the temple. God's answer in short, as they're asking, should we continue doing that? Well, if you had obeyed, first of all, Jerusalem would not have fallen back then. And then his point is in chapter 8, Jerusalem is being restored. You need to rejoice now. There's no longer a sense or time for mourning. And that should get us right on up to the chapters we need to look at tonight, 9, 10, and 11. Just throw these out there so you kind of got a sense. The overall theme, the future of Israel and the people of the Lord. Here to the end of the book. First part of chapter 9, there's judgment and destruction of these heathen enemies that he's naming off some of these countries, most of them neighboring, right around Israel and Judah. A lot of talk about the coming of the Messiah. That's a very positive part of this message of this book. The Lord's going to redeem his people. And then chapter 11 is a series of 3 allegories about the future of the physical nation of Israel. There's a lamentation, time about rejecting the good shepherd, and then instructions that Zechariah is told by God to play the role of a foolish shepherd, if you will. So, how I want to approach this tonight? Any thoughts as I've talked for 16 minutes? I'll let you catch your breath. Any other thoughts? Starting off or background or setting up, or something else struck you? I I want to go to page 121. If you don't have a book, well, I'm sorry. You can peer over someone's shoulder or something. Or maybe I won't call on you for some of these questions. Sometime we get to the questions, sometime we don't. So let's fly through some of these, and then we can look at some particular verses, perhaps out of each of the chapters. Page 121. What did Tyre do for herself? According to the message, the oracle. They built a tower for themselves. They built a stronghold. They heaped up silver and gold there. Anybody remember, have you ever looked at that or heard maybe a lesson about Tyre? Kind of, you got a summary on that, Lisa? Remember? I mean, where was it located first?
It was on the coast.
On the coast.
And I don't remember a lot about it, but I was thinking that was the one that got destroyed, and then they rebuilt it into like a little island, but the people used the rubble from the first destruction to go and take them out again. I may be wrong.
Yeah.
But,
I don't remember all the exact, but you're right. So they'd gone out a little bit from land, out in the water, out in the sea, Mediterranean Sea, built, a city there. Well, we can defend this. We're out in the water. Not everybody has boats or navy, and if they do, whatever. But as she said, they'd taken time they'd been destroyed. One of the conquering nations just starts chunking the rocks out in the water, chunking, built a walkway out to it, went out there. But it just ties into this. Again, what was their thought? We're out here. You can't touch us, like we've heard of so many of these nations. Look what we've done. Look how strong I am, or how smart I am to have set this up. Here's our stronghold, and can't be touched here. What will the Lord do to her? Number 2. Destroy it. Cast them out. Smite them in the sea. Devour them with fire. Yeah, all these things. Man, if I tried to find this in my notes, I think it was Amos 1 and verse 9. Yes, he had referenced page 117 about, this is your bonus question for those who've been here the whole quarter, and we're here for the book of Amos. Do you remember what the Lord had said, why he was going to destroy Tyre in particular? They remembered not the brotherly covenant. Yeah, how they'd mistreated or done with Edom in particular. But anyway, here we are again. That's not going to last. Your stronghold is going to be cast down. 3, what's the king of the daughter of Zion like? From chapter 9, verse 9. Just and having salvation. Character, is he proud and all lowly, right? Riding on the colt, the foal of a donkey. Yeah, all these things. To what extent would be his dominion? From 9 verse 10. Sea to sea and to the ends of the earth. Very good. So again, just a lot of these things. It helped me to keep in mind the audience, these Jews, whether they have come back and are with a small group back or somewhere still out in captivity. You've been overtaken or overrun by somebody and whatever. That's probably, threatening, frightening. I would feel the same. But here comes a message of one who's going to rule, has dominion, uses lightning. His arrows like lightning. Sea to sea, ends of the world. Far greater than any of these nations that he's talked about right around them, even though they had, power and might to their extent. 5, the idols and the diviners, what had they done? 10 verse 2. Speaking vainly, they listened to lies, they've seen a lie, and so the message then they would tell the people, in turn, is a lie. False dreams, he says, right? They comfort in vain. So, to me, this is one of the great, highlight jumped out at me. 10 verse 1. Ask you of the Lord. You need to ask of the Lord. And if you remember last week, one of the things they come along, right? Chapter 7. Hey, should we keep doing this feast of mourning and all this? At least they had come and asked. Now, that had been a problem of deficiency for hundreds of years prior, not asking the Lord or asking the right questions or all the time. But here's the message. You need to ask of the Lord. Come back to that as he's trying to turn them back to Zion, to Jerusalem, to the Lord's temple. And he talked in that same verse 10, verse 1. In particular, ask of him rain in the times of the latter rain. And the Lord's going to make things better. There's going to be showers and flowers and plants and everything you need. Blessings again. You remember in the workbook how he described what that phrase about the latter, ask for rain in the latter rains? A critical time to a farmer. He said it'd be very close right before harvest time. You need water. The plants need water to flourish and you get the best crop out, or however somebody smarter could say that than I am. And so he likens that then to they're living still in the Mosaical era, law of Moses. That's drawing to its close, as the years are going by. By prophecy, he's talking about the time when who's going to come? The Messiah is going to come, replace this law, this dispensation. So as you're nearing the end of that, pray and ask of the Lord for rain, for blessings and all this, because this one's about to end, but to bring about or allow for or set the stage, or whatever be the way to describe that, the one that's to follow, a new dispensation, the Messiah that would come. I like that imagery as well, and that's where he went on in then verse 2 as we read the question. The idols are speaking, vanity and lies and false dreams, comforting in vain. Well, ask of the Lord. See, is his point. You'll get the right answers. You get truth and righteousness and all of those things. Number 6, into where would God bring the people from Egypt and Assyria? Back into the land of Gilead, land of Lebanon. So again, back closer to home, closer to Jerusalem, back into their land, as it were. So again, this idea of some of these Jews are scattered in these other nations. And there's so many times he's referencing these chapters. God's going to whistle or call for them. His people are going to come out of these other places back home. Number 7, the shepherds were howling, the young lions were roaring, because what had happened to their glory? Glory is spoiled. The pride of Jordan is spoiled. And, number 8. This gets on into chapter 11, when Zechariah is told by God to go out and feed my people. And he takes 2 bands with him, right? And they've got names. What was signified when the staff bands was cut asunder? Question 9. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped 8. When the staff beauty was cut asunder, from 11 verse 10. Lord was breaking his, what? Covenant with the people, because they've rejected him. And then number 9, when the second staff, the bands, which had, I've got a footnote in my Bible, has to do with the union, right? Bringing together is the name of that particular. So when that one was cut asunder or broken, what was being broken? Judah and Israel, the brotherhood there. I thought that was just very interesting, his comments and paragraph on that there. Number 10, what would happen to the idle shepherd, the one that would leave the flock, would not care for them, does not lead them provision or see they get water and food and all the things a leader should do. Sword's going to come on his arm and his right eye. Some things that would be pretty handy for anybody. A leader also. The arm would be dried up, the right eye utterly darkened. Wouldn't, no vision, the sense there. True and false. God's people are compared to stones of a crown. 9:16, true. Exactly. Number 2, God promised to restore the house of Judah and of Joseph. True. 10 verse 6. That's what he said he would do. 3, Ephraim would always be weak and broken. False. 10 verse 7, right? They of Ephraim will be like a mighty man. Would come again. 4, possessors who slew their flock admitted their guilt. False. They would not. 11 verse 5. They hold themselves not guilty, right? Not me, we didn't do it, no fault of ours. God would cut off 3 shepherds in 1 month. 11 verse 8. True, I think. I guess you could read it and say, well, he told Zechariah to do this, but it's the workings of God, I think, behind it. So I put it as true. Okay. How are we doing? Man, we're doing great tonight. Let's drop back. We don't have time to read through all 3 chapters, but let's look at a few verses. I'm going to suggest a couple, but again, if there's 1 or 5 verses, whatever, that strikes you, please share it with you. He says from the beginning, very first paragraph in the workbook for tonight, the ending of verse 1, chapter 9, verse 1. He gives a rendering from the American Standard Version that Jehovah hath an eye upon men, upon all the tribes of Israel. Reads a little differently in King James or other versions. But the point being, God is in control. That he has an eye, if you then continue reading into this section, God has an eye for the destruction of these heathen nations, but also an eye for the protection of his own people. And that's what's going to be brought out time and time again as he's encouraging them. Look back to Jerusalem. Come, turn your hearts back to God. And physically, you could come back to this land as the nations down the road, they're doing the first things of trying to restore the nation into its place or into its strength. 2 through about 5 or 6 is where he's listing some of these other enemies they've had and what's going to happen to them. You talk about Tyre and Sidon and the Philistine cities and all this. 8, the Lord's going to camp around his people and protect them. He says, I'll be there, I'll fight for you. But now the idea also, we've seen the last few weeks so many times, he said, I'll be there in the midst of you. Now I'm going to camp around you like a wall of protection. Just some beautiful statements and thoughts there. In chapter 9, starting at verse 9 and following, the coming of the Messiah. Rejoice greatly. Here it is, daughter of Zion and daughter of Jerusalem. Your king comes to you, and you answered the question moments ago, what he would be like in his character and how he would make his appearance. Verse 10, he's going to cut off chariots and horses and battle bows or instruments of war. He shall speak peace, is what he's going to be about. So what they've seen is nation after nation coming through with a mighty war machine, cruelty, and just slaying everybody and what have you. The one being foretold of, the Messiah, it would be different in his character, in how he would act or bring about his kingdom, even calling people to peace, not strong-handing them or forcing them. Yes, Michael.
Well, it's a great contrast to what the Jews expected their Messiah to be. They would read this and interpret this as a physical king with this physical dominion, and yet we know that peace among the nations is a spiritual peace, not a physical one. We know that this dominion from sea to sea, the river, it's comprising the whole earth because it's a spiritual peace.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Man, if I'm not looking up, just holler, whistle or something. Yeah, good point. As he talked about time and time again, coming from all nations. Exactly. Let's see. I'll look on down through my notes. Top of page 118 in the book, again, he's making the point. The stark reality during Zechariah's day is that many of the Israelites were still dispersed in these heathen countries. And so that's why he's appealing to these Jews to return to Zion. And part of that is the promise. God would bless them. He would fight for them. And verses 16 and 17, salvation would come of the Lord. Dropping on to chapter 10 then, the first, there are 12 verses. So the first, middle, and last 12 verses. This is where he's exhorting them, ask ye of the Lord. And we talked a little bit about that. 3 and 4, God's anger kindled against the spiritual leaders. Is that something new, or have we seen that from the beginning of our study? The different prophets saying, kind of who's responsible, who has led you into this? There were the leaders like the priests and the false prophets, who had led you down this road. That didn't take away their own accountability, responsibility, but God is angry at those, and he's going to deal with those and punish them. Verses 5 through 7, chapter 10, he kind of makes the point in passing. verse 6 kind of particular. I will strengthen the house of Judah, save the house of Joseph, bring them again to place them. I have mercy on them. They'll be as though I had not cast them off. And then verse 7 also of Ephraim, which representative of the northern tribes, Israel. We've seen that used many times. They of Ephraim will be like a mighty man. So his point being that observe that both Judah and Israel included in this return, the invitation to come back, whatever nation, wherever they were, north, south, east, or west. God listening. There, verse 8 and following is this. King James has the word, I will hiss for them. He suggests where they're a whistling, a calling for his people again out of all these nations. For I have redeemed them. They shall increase. Verse 9, they shall remember me in far countries. Turn again. So he's going to send out this call. Again, there's the immediate context. It's happening. There's already one remnant, a bunch who've come back. There will be others come back out of Babylon in subsequent times or groups. But looking on down the road, as Mike was just suggesting, looking to the spiritual kingdom, how God's going to call you of every nation around the world. And there's going to be no more Jew nor Greek, male, female, bond or free, whatever. He's going to call, the invitation will be for all. And that's, I know we'll run out of time as usual, but just think about in the book of Zechariah, I hope you get a great sense of the positive nature of the book. That one, these people in captivity are being invited and called back. God's, I will fight for you, I'll defend you, I'll surround you and camp around you and take care of you. But looking also to the, down the road to the things about the Messiah and the spiritual kingdom that is to come. And if you can, I said, some of this is difficult. It is for me. But in whatever sense, if you can get a sense that he's talking about what they were doing right now to rebuild the temple, let's get going, get the city built back, and get commerce and all the things, people put back in office and put in place and all this. But also looking down the road, if you can get a sense of that with the Messiah. And some of these verses that surely from your knowledge of the New Testament, from 9:9, talking about the king coming that's lowly riding on this colt, the foal of an ass. I mean, have you read that somewhere? In Matthew 21, in the gospel accounts, when Jesus' triumphal entry back into Jerusalem, that coming to pass. We saw last week the number of quotations about the branch and looked at a few of those, the fulfillment in the New Testament. All these things, if you can get a sense of that, back to one of our first slides, what year or time frame was Zechariah speaking these things? 520 years BC. So if he knew what he was talking about, if he was accurate, and we can turn to Matthew 21, where it says, this is the guy the prophet was talking about, came to pass. A little later, the verse in here about, the price that would be paid. How much would be given when they reject the shepherd or God's Messiah, the Jews? What would be the price on his head? 30 pieces of silver, right? That's here in Luke. We just haven't got to that verse. Have we heard that somewhere? Have you read that in the Gospels where that is exactly what happened? Price put on Jesus' head. Think of 580 years prior to those events happening. Here's just a couple of examples of prophecy and fulfillment. And I said, even if I get lost or some of this language is above my head or I don't exactly, I hope, if nothing else, you can pull out those kind of things from this study. We're seeing some of those prophecies. We hear all the time, we hear preachers saying, oh, there were 300 prophecies came true in Jesus or whatever. Well, that sounds good. What are they? What are you talking about? That's what we're seeing from week to week and going through these books of prophecy. As these things, you go, well, yeah, I remember, in Matthew or Mark or Luke or wherever, where it talked about or referenced that. So just the fulfillment of prophecy, and I hope that, impresses you or sticks with you. From chapter 10, the Lord's going to redeem his people. He will be with them and deliver them in times of distress. And then chapter 11 are the allegories. There's the lamentation. I like the paragraph. This is page 119, the lamentation. In summary, it seems the prophet's looking to complete destruction of the Jewish economy, pointing to a final judgment on the political and religious Jewish system effected by the Roman legions in AD 70. Again, looking down the road. For physical Israel, it's turning the attention to the coming Messiah and the spiritual kingdom. Next allegory, the rejection of the Good Shepherd by physical Israel. Talking about when he would come and these corrupt leaders that were in charge in the days of Jesus and how they were mistreating the Jews and different people. But then how they in turn treated Jesus, who God sent to be the Savior, to be the Messiah, and they reject him. And, that's where it gets in all this about the covenant and how they've broken these things. Page 120, he's got a chart in here that it's just a great chart about Old Testament prophecies and New Testament fulfillment. As I was talking a minute ago, we mentioned a couple of them. Here he's looking from other chapters throughout the book as far as we've come. What has he got? About 6 different prophecies. And turn over the New Testament, he gives the verses. Read about where that happened, where it came to pass. It should increase our faith that God could and did send somebody to speak this 600 years before it happened, and these things come to pass exactly as he said. Okay. Any of the verses you want to share or jump out or comment on? Joe?
Just as a contrast, you mentioned in the beginning of chapter 10 that the idols that they were speaking to provided from the diviners false hope, no comfort. Contrast that with what you've just finished talking about, that God is providing a short-term hope for the remnant, but more so, so much more so, long-term through Jesus.
I appreciate you saying it. Somewhere in my notes, I make so many notes and underline and highlight so much, then I can't find them when I want to go back. It was good news for now, as Zechariah is speaking this, but how much greater news down the road, he said, with the Messiah, a spiritual kingdom, all these things. Anyone else? Okay. His takeaways, applications. He talks again about premillennialism that denies the reign of Christ has begun. But in Matthew 21, these verses are quoted and applied to Jesus. That's exactly what was happening, was going on. Chapter 11, the troubles that came upon the physical Jewish nation were a result of their rejection of Christ. The covenant relationship being broken. Again, because of their actions, their deeds, not any shortcoming on God's part. And then I tagged this one on from 9:17. We touched on this section a little bit. Yes, the Lord's going to fight for them. He'll save them in that day. We've seen that phrase come up so many times. But here he says it shows something far beyond his power. We talk about the weapons he could yield if he chose to. Whatever, lightning or whirlwinds, trumpets, all this stuff. But in this verse, isn't that just a great statement? How great is his goodness? How great is his beauty? That he talks about God in all these things. And I think that's what Joe was referencing. The far greater message is what's coming down the road than just, he can whoop the Assyrians or Egypt or whoever right now. True. But look what he's going to do and what he's working in the far-reaching plan. Next week, lesson 26, Lord willing. We've got, again, 3 chapters to wrap up this book, 12, 13, and 14. One of the keys, and he's going to bring this out if you've taken a sneak peek ahead. What happens in that day? There's going to be just a whole long list of things borne out. Again, this is looking down the road, that day of the Lord, when he accomplishes this plan he's been working on. And we'll try to wrap up Zechariah next week, Lord willing. Any closing thoughts? I hope you got something out of this book. So far, we're 11 chapters into it. By the time you can take a little something away from this, that's what it'll be for me. Got a little foundation for the book. Thank you very much.